For the first 30 seconds of this video, imagine discovering a version of Chucky so disturbing that studios refuse to touch it. A story where the killer doll is not just a slasher icon but a slow-burning nightmare born from obsession, ritual, and human cruelty. A tale that explores hidden experiments, corrupted souls, and an origin so violent and unsettling that it redefines what evil really means. And if you stay until the end, you will understand why this version of Chucky could never be shown on the big screen and why fans who uncover it are never quite the same again. From the very beginning. This story drags you into a world where horror does not rely on cheap scares but instead suffocates the mind with the idea that evil can be crafted carefully, patiently, and deliberately. Because this version of Chucky is not the result of a single moment of rage or a convenient supernatural accident, but the final product of a long descent into madness, where every step toward immortality required pain, sacrifice, and the complete destruction of empathy. Long before the doll became a cultural icon, before the plastic smile and the playful appearance masked the violence beneath, there existed a darker plan rooted in forbidden knowledge and twisted psychology. A plan that viewed human life not as something sacred but as a resource to be tested and discarded. And this is where the story becomes far more brutal than anything the movies dared to show. In this untold version, the transfer of a human soul into a doll was not a single ritual performed in desperation, but the result of repeated experiments. Carried out in secrecy, experiments that failed again and again, leaving behind broken minds and ruined bodies. Because the process demanded more than magic words and symbols and instead required suffering. Intense enough to fracture the soul itself, creating cracks where something else could crawl in and take hold. Each failure left behind an echo, a fragment of consciousness trapped between states of existence, and these fragments did not disappear, but instead clung to the doll, layering it with memories of fear, rage, and agony, slowly transforming it into a vessel that was never meant to contain so much torment. And this accumulation of suffering is what made this version of Chucky fundamentally different from the one audiences know, rather than a single personality driving the violence. Chucky became a convergence of broken identities, a storm of impulses fueled by every scream and every moment of terror that helped create him, and the result was an entity that did not kill simply to survive or to escape, but killed because destruction had become its natural state, the only way it could express the chaos inside. What makes this story especially disturbing is the way it emphasizes inevitability, because once the process began, there was no stopping it. Nope. Undoing the damage that had already been done, and every attempt to destroy the doll only seemed to strengthen it, as if the accumulated suffering acted like armor, protecting it from fire, impact, and even time itself. As the story unfolds, the horror shifts from physical violence to psychological dread, showing how the presence of the doll alone was enough to fracture sanity, causing those nearby to experience vivid hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, and overwhelming paranoia, not because the doll was actively attacking, but because its existence warped reality in subtle ways, bending perception until fear became indistinguishable from truth. This is where the brutality surpasses cinematic limits, because the victims are not simply chased or stabbed, but slowly dismantled from the inside. Their sense of self eroded by whispers they cannot escape, and visions they cannot explain, until they begin to doubt their own memories, their own intentions, and even their own humanity. The story suggests that Chucky A's true power was never the knife or the strength hidden within the small body, but the ability to infect the minds of others, planting seeds of violence and despair that grew on their own, turning ordinary people into reflections of the same cruelty that created him, spreading evil without ever lifting a hand. As the narrative reaches its most horrifying point, it becomes clear that this version of Chucky was never meant to walk freely among people or to exist as a simple antagonist, because the original intention was far worse, involving the creation of multiple vessels, an army of empty forms waiting to be filled with fractured souls. A concept so dark and hopeless that it reframes the entire legend as a glimpse into a much larger and more terrifying plan. The reason this story was too brutal for the movies becomes painfully obvious here, because it removes any sense of closure or victory, replacing it with the idea that evil, once engineered so carefully, cannot be contained or defeated, only delayed, and even then at a terrible cost that lingers long after the immediate threat is gone. Instead of ending with destruction or redemption, the story closes on the unsettling implication that the doll was only one piece of a greater experiment. A prototype that proved the concept worked, leaving behind unanswered questions about what else might exist, hidden in forgotten places, waiting patiently for the right moment to awaken. This is the kind of horror that stays with you. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it suggests. Because it forces you to consider the consequences of obsession unchecked by morality. The idea that the pursuit of power or immortality can strip away everything human until only cruelty remains. And that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not born, but deliberately built. By the end of this story, Chucky is no longer just a killer doll or a horror icon, but a symbol of irreversible damage. A reminder that some lines, once crossed, cannot be and that the true horror lies not in the supernatural elements, but in the human choices that made them possible in the first place. If this story unsettled you, disturbed you, or made you see the legend of Chucky in a completely different way, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is made for. So make sure to subscribe to the channel for more terrifying deep dives. Comment below with your thoughts and theories about this unseen version of the story. And share this video with anyone who thinks they know horror. Because some stories are too brutal to stay buried and too disturbing to be forgotten.